So this is a continuation from our last video where we looked at adding and subtracting fractions that have the same denominator. So in this second part, we'll be looking at how to add fractions and subtract fractions that have different denominators. So to add and subtract fractions with different denominators, we first of all need to find a lowest common denominator between the two fractions we are either adding or subtracting. So as an example, we have the sum of two fractions, 5 over 8 or 5/8, add a quarter or 1 over 4. So we have two different fractions. We have 5 over 8 plus a quarter or 1 over 4. Now, if we want to add both fractions, we first need to find the lowest common denominator. So the reason being is because both these fractions have different denominators, so we can't exactly add them as straightforward as when we had same denominators. So in the case like this, where we have two fractions with two different denominators, they both need to have the same denominator in order for us to add or subtract them together. So in this example, so when I say find the lowest common multiple of the denominators, so in this case our denominators are 8 and 4, we have to find the lowest common multiple between 8 and 4. And how do we do that? Well, we list all the multiples of 4 and 8, and in some cases you may not even need to list all the multiples, because you may find a lowest common multiple between the two lists very early on. But we list the multiples between the two numbers and we find the lowest number, which is a multiple of both the two numbers, in this case 4 and 8. So for 8, we have 8, 16, 24, because 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 8 times 3 is 24. So these first few numbers make up the multiples of 8. And for 4, we have obviously 4, 8, 12. And these are the multiples because 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, and 4 times 3 is 12. Okay, so now we have our list of multiples. We can now start to look for our LCM, or lowest common denominator. So the lowest common denominator is the multiple between the two numbers, in this case 8 and 4, which is the lowest number and is both also a multiple of both our two numbers, in this case 8 and 4. So if we look at our list again, we can see that 8 is the lowest common multiple because 8 is a multiple of obviously itself and is a multiple of 4, and it is the lowest number which is a multiple of both numbers. So that is how we know that is our LCM, or lowest common denominator. So now we have our LCM, or our lowest common denominator. We then convert each fraction into an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 8. So if you remember from when we were adding and subtracting fractions with the same denominator, all we had to do was just add the numerators together, because they already had denominators that were the same. So because in this example, our denominators are not the same, we have to make them kind of a similar thing. You're adding, so we have to make them into the same type of form in order for us to add them together. So if we look at our first fraction, which was 5/8, that already has a denominator of 8. So we don't need to do any further changes to this fraction. So we can leave it as it is. But 1/4, on the other hand, does not have a denominator of 8. So we have to go down the route of equivalent fractions, i.e. converting this fraction, 1/4, to an equivalent fraction with denominator of 8. And how do we do that? So obviously, if we were looking at each of the fractions, just at this fraction, if we wanted to convert this fraction into one of denominator 8, we ask ourselves, okay, what have we done to get from 4 to 8? What operation have we performed to get from 4 to 8? So obviously we multiply by 2, because 4 times 2 is 8. And if you remember from the video on equivalent fractions, whenever you convert a fraction into an equivalent one, any operation you do to the denominator, you must do to the numerator. So in that case, that means because we've multiplied 4 by 2 to get 8, or denominator 8, we multiply our numerator 1 by 2. So obviously 1 times 2 gives us 2. So the equivalent fraction is 2/8, or 2/8. So 1/4 is equivalent to, or the same as, 2/8. So we know from our last slide that 1/4 is equal to 2/8. So if we now look at our sum of 5/8 plus 1/4, or 1/4, we have 5/8 plus 1/4, which actually could be written as 5/8, or 5/8 plus 2/8. And the reason why we've added 2/8 is because 1/4 is the same as 2/8. So 1/4 is the same as 2/8. And in order for us to add fractions, they need to have the same denominator for us to add them. So obviously this sum is now very straightforward, because all we now have to do is add the numerators. So it will be 5 plus 2/8, and 5 plus 2 is 7. So it will be 7/8 as our final answer. So to summarize, 5/8 plus 1/4 is equal to 7/8, or 7/8. Now it's your turn to have a go at a few questions on how to add and subtract fractions with different denominators. So we've got 2 exercises here. We have an addition one and a subtraction one. So we have 2 over 7 plus 3 over 14, and 2 over 3 take away 1 over 5, or 1/5. So if you'd like, you can pause the video, and once you're done, we can walk through each question and see how you did. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at the two questions. So let's look at each one and walk through each of the steps. So our first question asks us to add 2 over 7 plus 3 over 14. So let's work this one out together. So we have two different fractions, 2 over 7 and 3 over 14. So when we want to add fractions, we must make sure first they have the same denominators. If not, then we have to then convert each fraction into fractions that have the same denominator. So we can start off by asking ourselves, so our denominators are 7 and 14. So if we want to find our lowest common denominator, or LCM, we have to list the multiples of each of our denominators to see which number comes up as the lowest, and obviously is also a multiple. So what I'm doing here is I'm listing out the multiples of both 7 and 14, so you can see what exactly we're doing here. So 7 goes 7, 14, 21, 28, and then 14 goes 14, 1 times 14, 2 times 14, 28, 3 times 14, 42. So obviously these are our first few multiples of both 7 and 14. And if we look closely, we can observe from just looking at our lists that 14 is a multiple of both 7 and obviously itself, 14. And it is the lowest common multiple of both 7 and 14. Why? Because 14 is a multiple or divides into 7, both 7 and 14, and it is the lowest number that divides into both numbers fully without any remainders. So that is how we know that 14 is our LCM. So now we know our lowest common multiple is 14. We can convert each of the fractions into fractions that have denominator of 14. So if we go onto a new slide to work this question out, so our original sum was 2 over 7 add 3 over 14, and our LCM, just so you remember, was 14. So using this LCM, we convert each fraction into a fraction with denominator 14. So let's start with 2 over 7. So 2 over 7 is equivalent to some fraction with denominator of 14. So we need to find what operation we perform to get from 7 to 14, which is we multiply by 2, because 7 times 2 is 14. So from doing this operation, because we performed it on our denominator, we must perform the same to our numerator. So we do 2 multiplied by 2, which is 4. So 2 over 7 is equivalent or equal to 4 over 14. So we've done 2 over 7, and our next fraction is 3 over 14. But in this fraction, our denominator is already over 14, and our LCM was 14. So we don't have to do any further manipulation to this fraction to get it in the form we want it to be in. So in this case, that's already done for us. So we can now look at this sum as, let's use a different color. So we have 2 over 7 plus 3 over 14, which is the same as 4 over 14 plus 3 over 14. And the reason why we've 4 over 14 is here is because 2 over 7 is equivalent to 4 over 14. So this sum now is very straightforward, because all we have to do is add our numerators together. So we add our numerators and we get 7 over 14. And of course this can be simplified down to a half, because we divide our numerator and denominator by the highest common factor, which is 7. So we divide by 7, we get 1. Divide by 7, here we get 2. So this, the answer to this sum is 7 over 14, or a half. That's that question done. And the next question, let's look at that one. So we have a subtraction problem. So we have 2 over 3 take away 1 over 5. So if we list the multiples of 3 and 5, then we have 5, 10, 15, 20, etc., etc. And if we look closely between both lists, we can see that 15 is the lowest common multiple of both 3 and 5, because it is a multiple or divides both into 3 and 5, i.e. 3 divides into 15 and 5 divides into 15, and it's the lowest common multiple, or the lowest number that is a multiple of both 3 and 5. So, which is why 15 is our LCM in this case. So now we know our LCM, we can then perform the subtraction problem. So our original sum was 2 over 3 take away 1 over 5. So we then need to convert each fraction into an equivalent fraction with denominator of 15. So 2/3 equals some fraction over 15. So how do we get from 3 to 15? We multiply by 5 because 3 times 5 is 15, which means we must do 2 times 5, which is 10. So 2 over 3 is equal to 10 over 15. Then we have 1/5, or 1 over 5, is equivalent to some fraction over 15. So we had some 5 times some number gives us 15, which is, that number would be 3, because 5 times 3 is 15, which means we must do the same to our numerator, which is 1. So we do 1 times 3, which is 3. So 1 over 5, or 1/5, is equal to 3 over 15. So we can write our problem, the above problem, 2 over 3, that's a big pen, 2 over 3 minus 1/5 is equal to, so we can write this sum as 10 over 15 take away 3 over 15. Why? Because 2 over 3 is the same as 10 over 15, which is what we've written here, and 1 over 5 is the same as 3 over 15, which is what we've written down here. So if we subtract fractions that have the same denominator, if we want to do that, we just take away each of the numerators from each other. So the sum then becomes 10 take away 3 over 15, which leaves us with 7 over 15. It's a little bit squashed, but hopefully you can see the answer. So our final answer to 2/3 take away 1 over 5 is 7 over 15. Okay, so as a quick overview, we looked at, in between the two videos, how to add and subtract fractions with the same denominator. So again, to recap, we just add the numerators or subtract the numerators if they have the same denominator. But in the case of where we had to add and subtract fractions with different denominators, there was a little more work involved in solving the problem, because both fractions have different denominators, we have to find the lowest common multiple of between each of the denominators, and from there we can convert them into fractions with the same denominator, which then makes our problem easier for us to solve. So with adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators, there is a little more work involved, but the steps are essentially the same once they are all fractions with have the same denominator.